Okay, I think it's time for us to get this webinar started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rocky Campbell, and I use he/him pronouns, and I am the Associate Vice President for Student Engagement and Experiential Learning here at Lewis and Clark College. I've worked at Lewis and Clark for 10 years in a variety of roles and was even an undergraduate student here many, many years ago. And I will add maybe another many to that. Um, as I mentioned in our last webinar, this year I have the privilege of working with my amazing colleagues in student engagement who are with us on the webinar today. Mary, Gabby, why don't you wave your hands? Um, and Mary, Gabby, and I are here throughout the summer and fall to ease your transition to college and help prepare you to make the most of what your Lewis at Clark experience is. Before we move on to the topic, of the day, I have a little first year checklist housekeeping for all of you. Last week, we began our summer series of 5 webinars for new students. And I want to remind you all that if you aren't able to attend one of the webinars live, they are posted on our website within about 24 hours or so of the webinar taking place so that you can watch them or rewatch them at a later date. Last week's webinar was about living on campus, an important topic that I know from my experience at Lewis and Clark is something that's on the top of everyone's minds as a new student and that lots of people have questions about. And I want to remind everyone who's either with us live or who are going to be watching this later that the housing applications are due June 15th. I know that our guests today are going to talk more about this, but it's also important to note that students also need to complete the housing accommodation process by June 15th for accommodation housing placement to be taken into consideration for the initial fall 2026 housing placements. For me, one of the important things about transitioning from high school to college and becoming an adult in general is learning about ourselves, what it takes for us to succeed and to perform our best, and really taking initiative for that process. Growing up, we've all had a lot of family, teachers, and other important people around us who watch, help, and support us. Um, and as an adult and as we grow up, we really have to take that process on ourselves. We continue to have those folks, but as we transition in age and roles and responsibilities, it really becomes a lot more of our own responsibility. We learn what we need to do our best, and then we start to help co-create that environment for us to succeed, where we can put ourselves in successful situations that are successful. Today's guests are here to help us talk about some of the processes at Lewis and Clark and the steps that sometimes need to be taken in order to create that learning and living environment that will help a student succeed at Lewis and Clark. Joining us today to lead the webinar, we have Katie McFadden, who is our Associate Dean of Student Academic Success and the Director of the Office of Student Accessibility. And we also have Stephanie Taimi Mendel, our Associate Director in the Office of Student Accessibility. As we go on, we encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A section. Some of those, depending on the content of them, we may answer directly in the chat or while we're talking, or we may approach you privately with a response. And so some of them may appear live, some of them may not. Be the judgment of our panelists on how to do that best. So now it's my privilege to turn this presentation over to Katie McFadden so we can start.
Great. You can go to the next slide, Rocky. It just kind of lays out the agenda. But we're going to talk through, we did introductions and we'll talk through transitioning to college and some of the process and deadlines in OSA and some things you can do this summer to prepare. We're definitely going to have time at the end for Q&A. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A box and Stephanie and I can monitor those. So for the next slide, we'll do some office introductions. Um, the office, oh yeah, one more. The Office of Student Accessibility, we serve all 3 campuses at Lewis and Clark. We serve undergrad, grad, and law. And our mission is to provide accommodations, education, consultation, and advocacy for students with disabilities. And in addition, we also support campus-wide community with accessing disability-related resources to support students. That looks like a lot of individualized appointments with students as we determine accommodations. And we also answer a lot of questions and collaborate with staff and faculty across campuses in support of students' accessibility. So, as Rocky mentioned, I'm Katie McFadden. I'm the director of OSA. I've worked at Lewis and Clark for about 10 years, and in my current role, I also am the director of the College Advising Center. Our team in OSA includes three other staff members, as well as grad and undergrad student workers. Rebecca Brooks, who's the person like the next picture next to me in the slide with the blue shirt on. Rebecca's our associate director, and she's been a part of OSA for over 20 years. Her area of specialty includes accessible educational materials. And next to her in the black vest is Carolyn Thompson. She's our administrative specialist. She works primarily on logistics around implementation of accommodations and exams. And for the last introduction, I'll pass the baton to my coworker, Stephanie, who will then do some of the next few slides as well.
Cool. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so I'm Stephanie Timey Mandel. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Associate Director at OSA. I have been working here for almost 4 years now, but I am also a graduate of both the undergraduate college and the grad school. Even though I've only been working here for a few years, Lewis and Clark has been a part of my life in one way or another for about 2 decades now. Before I worked at Lewis and Clark, I worked as a school psychologist in K-12 schools for about 7 years. So I have had the chance to see both sides of supporting students with disabilities in both high school and in college. And I really love getting to do this webinar because I think that the transition to college as a student with a disability can be a really confusing process. It's one that I certainly didn't understand anything about before I actually started working in higher ed. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do this webinar and make that a little bit clearer. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. One more. Cool. We'll start here. So I'm going to first talk about the transition to college as a student with a disability, and particularly for students who have had either a 504 plan or an IEP in the past. High school and college are very different, of course, in just about every way, and that includes the ways in which disabled students access services and supports. So that link that's on the slide, also the QR code, I'm hoping maybe we can put that link in the chat. The new students link, um, goes to our new and incoming students section of our website, and there's a page on there that has a detailed overview of what these differences are. I'm going to explain a few of what I think are the most important ones. Um, so the first is that of the laws and regulations that govern disabled students' rights and responsibilities. There are three applicable laws here: Section 504, the IDEA, and the ADA. Section 504 covers both K-12 schools and post-secondary institutions, but the rules are a little bit different. How they are applied is a little bit different. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, that's the law that governs the creation and maintenance of IEPs, only applies to K-12 and does not apply to college. Instead, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, applies in college, and again, the rules there are different. Neither a 504 nor IEP actually transfers to college. The main differences between these are, one, that accommodations and services in high school are mainly meant to help ensure disabled students' success in school. And what I mean by that is meant to help ensure that you make academic progress, that you're promoted to the next grade, that you get to that finish line of graduating and getting your diploma, while accommodations in college are mainly meant to help ensure equal access to educational opportunities. These are very different. Equal access means that students with disabilities have the same opportunity as their non-disabled peers to participate in all of the college's programs and services that we offer. Everyone gets the same fair shot to either succeed or fail, or somewhere in between. We can't ensure that you're going to be successful. We cannot ensure that you're going to pass every class, but the accommodations that you're provided should level the playing field so that you have the same shot as everyone else, so that your starting line is the same starting line as the non-disabled person next to you. Still up to you to get to the finish line. Um, the other main difference is that in K-12, Services and accommodations are designed to meet individual needs and might include modifications to standards or alterations of a curriculum. Colleges, by contrast, are not required to provide services that would result in a modification or alteration of a standard or curriculum. What does this mean? If the application of any given accommodation would what we call fundamentally alter or change a curriculum, a standard, a learning objective, or the way in which a class is taught or structured, then it may not be considered applicable in certain situations. An example of this would be, somebody who has a disability that significantly impacts their ability to do public speaking, so like presentations and the like, might have an accommodation that excuses them from presenting in front of the class. But if that person takes a class where one of the learning objectives is to learn public speaking skills, then that accommodation is most likely not going to be considered applicable in that situation. Can we go to the next slide? Cool. Um, the other major piece about the transition to college that I want to highlight is the shift in responsibility. So in K-12, it's mainly the responsibility of the school and the parents or the guardians to advocate for the student, put together that educational plan, and make sure it's being implemented. In college, we can't even talk to your parents about you without your consent. You, the student, are responsible for reaching out to us, self-identifying to us as a student with a disability, and following our process for setting up accommodations. We will walk you through that process. You don't have to know the whole thing off the top of your head, but you do have to take that first step. It doesn't just happen. Your high school will not send us your 504 plan. You need to submit whatever documentation you have to us, meet with us directly, and be ready to discuss what your individual disability related needs are. That's what allows us to come up with a plan in conjunction with you for what accommodations and supports are going to be necessary for you in college. So that leads me into the next topic, which is what is our process? Can we go to the next slide? One more. Yeah, thanks. So here's a basic overview of our process for setting up accommodations. We use a software called Accommodate for managing most of our accommodations stuff. And so you will have your own student portal that you can log into and do a bunch of your tasks from that you might need to do. So yeah, step one is to gather and submit documentation of your disabilities. You can see here what our general guidelines are for what that documentation should look like. Residential accommodations are a little bit different, and I will discuss those requirements when we get to the next slide. Then you're gonna meet with us to discuss what your needs are from your perspective. So what the specific impacts of your disability are for you, the accommodations that you've used in the past, what you anticipate you might need as you start college, things like that. Those first two steps, the documentation and meeting with us, can be done in any order. You do not have to have submitted your documentation in order to meet with us. If it's going to take you a while to get documentation, that's totally okay. Please meet with us in the meantime. There's no need to delay that initial meeting. Once we have met with you, reviewed your documentation, and reached a determination about accommodations that you qualify for, you'll sign an accommodation agreement, which is an internal record between you and OSA about what accommodations have been agreed to. This accommodation agreement is not shared with faculty. And then step 4, every semester, preferably at the beginning of the semester, you will do a process called a semester request, which is a request for your current professors for the current semester to be informed about your accommodations. This is what officially activates your accommodations for that semester. Your professors will not know what your accommodations are until you do this step. After you do that semester request, your professors will then receive a formal letter stating what your accommodations are. You will also receive a copy of that letter. And at this point, it's highly, highly recommended that you meet with your professors to discuss what your accommodations will look like in each class. And that's because they can be different from class to class. And it's really important to have that understanding ahead of time as to how to handle things that may come up in each class. One important thing about having conversations with your faculty is that you do not at any point need to disclose to them what your disability is or what your diagnosis is. That is legally protected information and they do not need to know it. OSA is also available to assist with any of these conversations that you might need to have with professors or any disputes or disagreements that you have with your faculty about your accommodations. So please, if something doesn't seem right, even if you're not quite sure, please reach out to us. We can help. Um, Other steps that might be needed, depending on what accommodations you have, could include like scheduling your exams with OSA, steps for accessing a set of classroom notes, steps for accessing ebooks, things like that. Next slide, please. Cool. I also want to highlight one really important deadline that Rocky mentioned that we have coming up this summer, which is our residential accommodation deadline. So if you anticipate that you might need a housing accommodation or a residential accommodation of some sort, the deadline for incoming students to have finished setting these up with OSA in order to be guaranteed access to these accommodations on day one of when you move in is June 15th. So that means that you need to have submitted your documentation to us and met with us by that date. The exceptions, excuse me, to this deadline are emotional support animals and meal plan accommodations. Those we can process anytime. But this would be for if there's anything in particular about the type of features of the housing that you live in that you anticipate needing, such as like limiting the number of roommates that you have, living on the ground floor, or housing that doesn't require, going up and down many flights of stairs, things like that. Um, Excuse me. The other important thing to remember is that we do ask for a specific piece of documentation for housing accommodations. It's called the Residential Accommodation Documentation Form. We also have that linked. I'm wondering if we can put that in the chat as well. Yeah, so this is a form that your licensed medical or mental health provider needs to fill out. It asks specific questions that we must have answered in order to be able to consider and approve housing accommodations. So again, if you anticipate that you might need a housing accommodation, please do that and please engage in our process prior to June 15th. Um, Academic accommodations can be arranged at any point in your educational career. You do not have to do it right now. Um, but one thing that's important to keep in mind is that the process of setting them up can take some time, and accommodations cannot be applied retroactively, or rather, we cannot mandate that they are applied retroactively. So let's say if you haven't set up your accommodations yet and you have a flare up of a chronic illness and you miss several classes, once you set up your accommodations, we cannot mandate that the professor excuse you for missing those classes in the past. Um, there are also some deadlines each semester related to things like scheduling your final exams, requesting accessible furniture by a certain date, sending your accommodation letter by a certain date. So we do have deadlines for those, and that's because those things do take time to set up. And at some point in the semester, it's too late to do that. Next slide. Okay, there's also a link there and a QR code that goes to the same place. Goes to a section of our website that has a list of some of our common accommodations in case you want to peruse that. The link goes to our overall accommodation process, but if you scroll down to almost the end of the page, there's a section that's titled Accommodation Examples. This list is not exhaustive. Accommodations are highly individualized to each student based on your documentation and your conversation with us, but it's just so you can get an idea of what's out there. I think the next slide is going to be taken by Katie.
I'm coming back. You can, yeah, perfect. So we thought we could talk through some of the steps that you can take this summer to really hit the ground running in fall. First, set up your accommodations. Doing so can take a little time, so do yourself a favor, book a meeting with us sooner, not later, especially if you're looking to secure housing accommodations, like Stephanie explained. The deadline is mid-June. If your last psychoeducational testing was over 5 years ago, it might be helpful to do testing again if you can, and doing so at home with providers you already know will be easier than trying to do so after you've moved to college. So that's one thing to consider. Not absolutely necessary, and you can ask us if it is, but it's one thing to think about. Third, for everybody, we would recommend setting up kind of a game plan as a family. And you can use the transition guide website that Stephanie spoke about. This is something you can do with your family, your providers, maybe both, to ensure how you're going to just tackle various pieces of the transition to college. And I'll give a really common example, which is that in high school, that most students have like a centralized website where you can track all your assignments, your due dates, your grades, just up to the minute information, and your parents have access to. And so you have probably gotten used to being able to check that website, or they have, and stay on top of stuff and use that as kind of your, tracker for everything. And at Lewis and Clark, we have some similar systems, but they're not all used the same way by all faculty. And your parents won't have access. So you want to strategize. Like, how are you going to track deadlines and assignments for 3 or 4 different classes, 3 or 4 different professor styles? What kind of calendar system will you use? How will you give yourself reminders? Um, it's kind of an executive functioning puzzle, without maybe some of the tools you were used to in high school. So that's a kind of example of thing you could work through as a family. Or you could work through, okay, what kind of academic updates at what frequency are your parents expecting from you? How do you want to give that information to them? Finally, we would say to develop a wellness plan with your supports and identify what professional supports you might need to replicate here in Portland. If you regularly saw in high school a specialist, a therapist, a tutor, an executive functioning coach, spend some time this summer identifying how you're going to transition that resource to college. You can talk to us, and you can talk to some other people we can put you in touch with. And you can, in fact, go to the next slide, Rocky, and we'll talk more about this wellness plan. It's important enough we thought it would be helpful to have its own slide. Um, So, finding new healthcare providers, as you know, can take time. So, you might want to start by asking your current providers if they're licensed to give you virtual care when you're in Oregon. And if they are not, you may have to transition to some providers in the Portland area. If you feel stuck, we've included here a website about off-campus referrals from our page, as well as the name and contact information for our case manager, Gabby Herman. Yeah. And one of Gabby's superpowers, in addition to just being a all-around super friendly, amazing person, is working with students to identify resources and referrals. So she could help you say, you know what, I had this kind of therapy or this kind of specialist at home, and they can't transition to Portland, so I need to find that here in the area. And Gabby's available through mid-June, and then again starting in mid-August. You can kind of plan around those dates for her if you'd like to talk with her. And then you can go to the next slide, Rocky. That concludes sort of the content we put together for everyone. We really wanted to save enough time for Q&A if people had it. So here on this slide, you'll see our contact information for the office, and the QR code can take you to our main page. You can call, email, or you can type your questions right now into the Q&A box. Sometimes it takes a little time, we've learned, for people to start thinking of those questions. So if you go down a few slides, Rocky, like slide 17, Stephanie and I set up a few that we really are frequently asked questions in the summer, and then we can ask them of each other. Yeah. You want me to give it a go, Stephanie? I can ask you the first one. Okay. Stephanie, I'm the pretend student. I had a 504 plan or IEP in high school. Will this automatically transfer to college?
Great question, Katie. No, it will not. Yeah, like I discussed earlier in the presentation, these things do not automatically get transferred. You need to reach out to us. You need to submit your documentation to us. You need to self-identify to OSA that you have a disability and need accommodations.
And you know what? I'm going to ask the flip side of that one, because sometimes we get the reverse, which is we have had families or students assume that without a 504 or IEP, they're not eligible for accommodations.
Mm,
Can we kind of answer that one? So, I remember a
mhm.
family asking that, like, oh, would we have to have a 504 in order to have accommodations in college?
No, you do not need to have had a 504 or an IEP in order to access accommodations in college. Really, the only necessary thing to get started is to identify as a person with a disability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And so
Um,
you would bring documentation, which could be a 504 IEP, but it could also be like a letter from your provider outlining
correct.
the barriers you experience.
Yeah. Yep. Um, we do have a live one here, and it looks like Mary is typing out an answer. Um, we can keep going with our
We can
list
keep going, sure.
while she's working on that. Katie, I am the student. Do I need to attend the meeting with OSA, or can my parent or guardian do it for me?
They cannot do it for you. This goes back to some of the transition slides and differences that Stephanie outlined, that you, the student, will need to attend the meeting. And not only do you need to attend, we're going to direct a lot of our questions to you about your experience and um, what you experience as the impact of your disability. So if you'd like, your parent or guardian can come with you to the meeting, but you would want to be prepared that you're going to be the one talking about your experiences.
Cool.
Um, okay, Stephanie, I'm the student. My documentation is more than 5 years old. Will you still accept it? Is that okay?
Good question. It depends. A lot of answers are it depends. I would say, are not so, and this can vary from school to school.
Mm-hmm.
Different schools might have different requirements for documentation, but for us, for Lewis and Clark, we are not so focused on getting recent documentation as we are on getting current documentation. And what I mean by that is that the documentation needs to do a good job of describing what your current needs are. So it may be that your documentation from when you were 10 years old and first diagnosed about your lifelong condition does pretty much match what your current needs are. Or it could be that things have changed significantly since you last got that documentation. So think about that when you're thinking about what to submit. And also, if you're in doubt, please feel free to submit it anyway so that we can review it and discuss it with you. And then we can let you know if we need something that's more recent than that.
This is why setting up accommodations can take a little time or be an iterative process too.
Yep.
As Stephanie mentioned, you'd get started, and then if we need to ask for some more information or clarify, we will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Stephanie, will I, new student at Lewis and Clark, have a case manager or an academic advisor who checks in with me regularly?
That is a pretty common thing for a student with a 504 or an IEP in high school, to have somebody that checks in with you regularly, and is monitoring your progress. But that's unfortunately not really a thing in college. You will have advisors at Lewis and Clark. You'll have both your academic, your like faculty advisor, and you will have somebody who's assigned to you in the college advising center. But again, that shift in responsibility is to you. So those folks might reach out to you, but they are not going to come and find you during your math class if you don't make an appointment with them or you don't respond to, their emails. So it's not the same level of support that there might have been in high school around that.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Katie, I, the student, need to meet with someone regularly to help me with organization, managing deadlines, general executive functioning stuff. How do I do that?
This is a great question because I know that there are some schools that do have kind of a center with executive functioning coaches that really are designed to like meet regularly for things like this. Lewis and Clark has a lot of academic resources, including tutoring and advisors. We don't, though, have this kind of like coaching center. So I work with a good number of students who have really found like executive functioning coaches to be very helpful in high school. And if that is you, or if you think that could be really helpful with the transition, um, you would need to find that outside of Lewis and Clark. We do maintain a list in the Office of OSA of some coaches that other families have used, and we can share it with you. But that'd be example of some like a resource if you found it really helpful in high school, you would want to talk with us, um, or talk with your providers about how you can replicate it in at Lewis and Clark or in the Portland area.
Cool. Um, I think I'm asking you the next one too.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so Katie, I suspect that I might have a diagnosis that I've never actually been diagnosed with or tested for. How can I access testing for this?
Yes, that's not that unusual of a question. Students will say I got through okay in high school, but I've long suspected X or Y. Um, I There are ways to do neuropsych testing in the Portland area. There are wait lists, and they come at some like it's a financial cost for most people. Um, Gabby, the case manager, who I gave the contact info for in an earlier slide, can talk with students about some of those options. You could also work with your insurance at home, even this summer, to kind of explore if there's any options at home to be tested. Um, we are not able to do that in OSA, but we are used to routing students and talking with them about options for getting that done. Is there more you'd add there, Stephanie?
Only that like you mentioned neuropsych testing, and depending
Hmm.
on what diagnosis you're seeking, a full neuropsych may or may not be necessary.
That's true.
So yeah, we can route you to, or
Hmm.
Gabby can help route you to the appropriate provider for what you're looking for.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And finally, okay, I had accommodations in high school, but I would like to try not having them in college. Can I do that?
Sure, but should you? Some of our students definitely do this. It's normal to want that fresh start. And yeah, so some folks try that, and maybe in some cases it goes well. Maybe in some cases it doesn't, and you realize that maybe there was a really good reason that those accommodations were there in the first place. So it is really up to you, the student. You are in control of your destiny here. And if you're not sure if you want to use accommodations, that's okay. Again, because the process can take some time, what we recommend, of course, is setting them up with us. But if you recall the semester request step of the process that I talked about before, that's the part where you decide whether or not to inform your professors about what your accommodations are and activate them for the semester. You get to decide every semester whether or not that happens. So it's better to have set them up and have them there waiting to be activated should you need them to, right? If you realize you need them halfway through the semester to, have them there ready to go rather than having to go through the entire process at that point in the semester of setting them up. Because again, cannot be applied retroactively and can take some time. So we do encourage folks to set them up sooner rather than later.
And there's a lot of confidentiality. It's not like anyone else in your class or your residence hall would know. I mean, the letter's routed just to your faculty member, and they're not
Correct.
sharing that information. So,
Yep. Any other questions from anyone? Cool. Well, yeah, if we go back, I think 2 slides, again, our contact information is there. Yep. So feel free to reach out if you think of any other questions. And yeah, we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If there are no further questions, I think we're going to stop sharing and end the webinar for everyone. And you can always ask further questions to the first year experience. Email Gabby, Mary will be happy to help direct you or ask them directly of Katie, Stephanie, Gabby, anyone that's been presented today, and they'll be able to help you as well. So thank you very much for joining us today.